That was from the song Higher Speed by Coldplay. You're listening to ZM Radio. I'm Jen Wilding, and we continue with part 2 of the U.S. Coordinator panel that aired on October 10th. And the discussion includes the following coordinators: Adam from Maryland, Carl from New Jersey, Tenaro from Louisiana, Stephen from Mississippi, Bakari in Georgia, Raul from Virginia, Gary from North Carolina, Austin from Illinois, Jason from California, and myself with the United States. And we left off in the middle of responses to the question, what do you say to people who express that they think the Zeitgeist Movement isn't doing enough or needs to take a different approach? The truth is, if you're looking for the activism, you will find it. But if you're not looking for it, if you're just kind of opening your door and saying, yeah, I don't see any Zeitgeist people out here, again, it kind of goes back to, what Adam and Austin were saying. It is sort of the armchair activists that are online and they're, on forums all day long saying, when's anybody going to do something? When's anybody going to do something? And it's so funny. Change starts with you. It's not about going online and arguing with people all day. It's about actually connecting with people and starting that shift, because it isn't going to happen in your area if someone doesn't start that. So it is a personal responsibility thing. It is a recognizing the power that you have just in getting that going where you are. And it is a weird response. It is uncomfortable for people who are used to being subservient, wage slaves. Our culture is very much conducive to us just taking orders and having somebody else figure it all out for us and hand it to us in a kit. But, you may have a great activist idea, but there is not, like I said, operators standing by at the Zeitgeist Movement ready to enact your activist idea. No, your idea, your project, and that's something we come back to frequently. But when it works in your chapter, as you guys have mentioned, it really does work well. Let's see. I wanted to mention, too, about numbers. You'll know when we're ready because, as far as approaching critical mass, because it will start to become self-evident by the shifts that people are making. And we're not so hung up on the digits of numbers. But one thing you can consider is that, we had a number that was at like 500,000 approximately for the global movement, but it's not necessarily that we stopped counting. We did, but what really happened is there was a transition in that we broke off then and emphasized people connecting with their local chapters so that more events were happening on the ground in communities. And then that's where the activism is taking place. So you really would have to collect all that data. And we've tried. It's challenging. With the volunteer movement to have that all come in at times. But sometimes I will connect with coordinators and say, what you got? What's it look like? But even then it's an approximation, because what's a member? Really? Anyone? Any person who aligns their value set with what we're doing, who thinks what we're doing is a good idea and is working to understand it more and more every day. As far as I'm concerned, that person's a member. When you get into coordination, that's the person who is coordinating. When you get into official coordination, that's the person who is officially part of our network that has agreed to they know what we're doing and how we're doing it, and they've said, I want to do that too. And they volunteered to step into that role. So I'm so thankful that all of you have chosen to step into that role, because we got a really good group. And even people that aren't represented on this panel yet, but we have a pretty good sampling here of some of our most inspiring activists. So next, I believe I have...
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, Carl, go ahead, jump in.
Just one last thing about mass media, and it's why I advocate. Even though the Occupy movement has slowed, it's true, it's too late. The damage is done. It's already part of the political discourse now. The 1% is a highlighted catchphrase. 320 million people know about it. What if a resource-based economy became part of the political discourse? What if an RBE was a highlighted catchphrase? The mass media could do that for us. I do think we need to think of something to break in.
When you come up with that, if it's not something you feel like you're capable of doing, then try to rally people who are interested in it if that's where their talent set is. But in general, yes. One of the things we do is try to encourage people to always do a press release when you have an event, to let people know that something's going on. But the more and more creative we can get with events and with activism, I think we'll get a better shot. I do think it's coming. I just think there's a lot of, it's the signal to noise ratio is not exactly where we need it to be yet, but as long as we keep pushing at it. And thanks again for reminding us of that, Carl, that, not to be afraid of seeking out the mainstream media, even though we just talked about boycotting it, more from a sense of where you're getting your news sources, what news you're getting. Go to independent sources, but most of us are doing that. Next up is Tenaro.
Sure, getting back to the question at hand of what would I say to a person who says the Zeitgeist Movement isn't doing enough. I was reminded of a critic I dealt with here recently who accused the Zeitgeist Movement of, quote unquote, not having any teeth. And to which I replied to the person, I'm not convinced that you even know what it is we're trying to bite. Because I won't argue that there is more that we could be doing. There's always going to be more that we could do. But that argument tends to be used as either an unfair criticism or a cop-out, depending on which of two kinds of people that's issuing the criticism. It comes from the armchair activist who doesn't really want to do anything, or it comes from the person who doesn't know what it is we're trying to do. It comes from the critics who, I shouldn't say the critics, I shouldn't even give them that the benefit of that label. It comes from the unfair, trollish type of critics who are grasping at straws, trying to find some way of criticizing us, even to the extent of dishonesty. And as far as the actual critics, and I've had the pleasure of dealing with some of those, they're people who just simply don't know what it is we're actually doing, either because they watch the movies and they don't actually read the orientation guides or listen to the lectures. They just watch the Zeitgeist movies and then they stop there and declare themselves well enough informed, and then they look around and they see what the Zeitgeist Movement is actually doing, and they say, well, that doesn't jive with what my perception of what it is you guys are trying to do actually is. Therefore, the Zeitgeist Movement isn't doing enough. No, they much of the time they just don't understand what it is we're actually trying to do. So what I do whenever I encounter somebody is I try to categorize them in which category of critic are they? Are they the armchair activist, or are they the person who doesn't know what it is we're actually trying to do? And I go from there. The armchair activists, sometimes you can save them. A lot of times you can't. All you can do is motivate them in every way conceivable. As far as the uninformed, that's how I choose to categorize the other kind of person, is the uninformed critic. The best way of dealing with that is the same way you deal with everything else whenever a disagreement comes together, is open a dialogue and communicate as effectively and fairly and honestly as you possibly can, and sometimes you reach an agreement. And I had such an experience not long ago. It was right here in Shreveport where I attended a different kind of event. It wasn't a Zeitgeist event, but I was allowed to present Zeitgeist material, and it turned into a cross-table conversation between me and one other guy. And he later told me that after having the conversation with me, he spent the evening pacing his patio, thinking about everything he had ever been taught about society and about economics. And I took that as a bit of a compliment.
Definitely. Jason, did you have something to add?
I was just going to add one more type I've met in with the ones like Tenaro had pointed out, like the armchair activist. Yeah, which is also, I find that an endearing distinction, because usually they're not motivated, but they're well-intended. But the other type I've met is what I call the cause fighter, which goes after one cause and then another cause, and there's always a fight, an us versus them sort of paradigm. And I have a couple of really close friends who do help out, with some of our larger events in the movement, but they're always involved in fighting a corporation or fighting a piece of legislation. And when they ad hom our actions is not doing enough, I find that it's usually in paradox to their criticism, because they need mass awareness for their own cause. They need enough people to make a difference with whatever particular piece of legislation they're trying to fight against, or, corrupt politician they're trying to fight against. And so I always bring it back to that. It's like, well, you're actually on the same page with us because you're in need of going after mass awareness. Like, well, why stop at patchwork? Why stop at a symptom? Why not go right to the root cause of the issue with the mass awareness point of view?
So Tanaro is kind of bringing up that I've shared a funny anecdote that my first Z-Day that I had, one of the coordinators who volunteered to help me with that event very informally said, "Hey, I'm on board with this. Let's do it. I'll help out." It came late to the event, but then also came dressed in full military regalia with a magazine of ammunition strapped across his chest and DVDs of the first movie to hand out with a graphic design of blood spatter on them. And I just looked at him and I was like, oh my gosh, are we here for the same event? And then when he saw that we were in the middle of screening what was at the time our orientation video for the movement, it was so different than that he had the same thing occur to him. Like, am I in the right place? He wasn't familiar with that part of it. He just got really jacked up from watching Peter's first movie, which, I tell people it's a rant piece. And it was before there was a movement. And that what we're about is more about the evolution part than the revolution. But certainly it is revolutionary. And you have the feeling of being a resistance just because we're resisting the status quo. But the way we're doing it is very nonviolent. If you've ever heard the phrase, what you resist persists, that's something I remind myself of because it helps me place my energy in the right place. It's better to be for something than against something. It's so much stronger. And even Buckminster Fuller, when he says, create a new system to make the existing one obsolete, and that's the way to do it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing him. Of course, he said it much more eloquently, but that's what I always keep in mind is we are in the midst right now. When people say, what's a transition look like? Like, you're in it. We are in the midst right now of transitioning to getting everyone on board voluntarily of their own choice to work towards that common system where we are addressing root problems, where we're using the scientific method for social concern. Connect with people emotionally first, because you've probably noticed this, no better place than this movement, that people don't make decisions from a place of reason or rationality. It actually comes from a place of emotion. And we're all that way, believe it or not. And even the people in this room, the difference is that we have placed a high value, emotional value, of positive emotions on things that are reasonable and rational. And that's sort of the difference. We love it when things click and make sense across the board and our technical solutions, aside from any politics, like we don't even have to go there. We can just look at what is needed and how to efficiently get it with what we have. And when we start taking that approach, it crosses all these barriers that exist right now as far as these other institutions, nationality and politics and religion, even the base level. It's what's it all about? Surviving and thriving and helping each other out and creating together, those kinds of things. And Tanaro is adding in the text, we are evidence that we can work without money. We do it voluntarily. Sometimes use some stuff out of pocket, but hey, I mean, our value set is reflected in what we're choosing to do with our free time, if anything else. And it is influencing people, whether or not you realize it. And I'm going to get into that when we get into this next question. What actions do you recommend for one person wanting to spread awareness in their community? What actions do you recommend they take as one person? And we've actually gone over some of these in the process of this discussion, but what comes to mind for you? And I'll let Bakari go first.
I said this in my first radio show. Please, before you go out, before you start spreading awareness, before you do anything, read. There's so many materials that we have. We have a reading list. We have a book of the month. We have lectures. We have speakers who have spoken. Please, there's nothing more depressing for me when I'm out or I'm with somebody who I know is a member of the Zeitgeist Movement and they have a conversation and I can look at them and know without a doubt they don't know what they're talking about. I hate when I'm out with somebody and they start quoting the movie verbatim. I hate when I'm out with somebody and they tell somebody to go watch the movie but they introduced the conversation. They started the conversation about the Zeitgeist Movement and then told the person to watch the movie. So the first thing anybody, if you want to spread awareness, please, 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 please read.
Thank you for that. And I will say this, though. I'm going to play devil's advocate just a little bit. In that what I found is that there are a lot of people that just don't read. And they'd have to cultivate that, sort of get in the habit of that before they'd really be fluent with that. So it's a little bit of when they're looking at the mountain of information. And I would say this, there is a lot of material through our chapter channels that we post and through the TZM official channel on YouTube, lectures that you can watch that have nice, pretty pictures, programs that people have created, like Doug Millett's Awakening, things like that, people that are creating all the time and putting up there, resources so that you can start to get the language, you can start to get the train of thought, even if you're not a reader. And going back really quickly to put in a resource about people were talking about how do we relate to Occupy. There was a video done where myself and Jason and Peter were talking to an Occupy group in Venice. I believe it's called Venice Talks. If you go to the TZM official channel on YouTube, you can search that up and see. And that's the group that we're interacting with specifically. So if you're wanting to learn more about how to engage that type of crowd, you'll get some of your questions answered that way with the Q&As. And even some of the Q&As that we've recorded from town halls, and where people are posting things more and more all the time, even from this group, has produced some good stuff and presentations. So you could, if you're an auditory person or you like some visuals and pictures and graphs and things like that, we have a little bit of everything. And certainly Peter's films have done a lot to bring people to the movement for entertainment. Anytime you can do something entertaining that brings in these ideas, go do it. And with that, I'm going to move on to Gary.
Well, I have to say that I couldn't agree with Bakari more, and that self-education is probably one of the single most important aspects of what we're doing. And it's an open-ended process. It's never ending. On another note, and I agree with Jen in this sense, we have to meet people where they're at, and we have to do it in ways that we're able to. So in terms of an action that I found that has been working for me as an individual, trying to do something when I don't have the time and the opportunity to organize larger events, I've been having some success locally with creating a display for some DVDs. This was something that was suggested in one of our U.S. chapter meetings by another coordinator a month or two ago, and I decided to follow up on it, and I got a hold of some cardboard displays that hold about 17 DVDs, and I got a hold of some nice plastic cases, black plastic cases, and I print up on my inkjet printer nice labels for the DVDs that I make, and I make about 2 or 3 of these displays, one of them holding Zeitgeist Moving Forward, one of them holding Culture in Decline, another one holding Zeitgeist Addendum. But you can use whatever you want, and you put those out with some brochures, some flyers that talk about the Zeitgeist Movement. And this, I work full-time, so I'm one of those people that still has a job. Whether that's fortunate or not, I don't know. But I do, so I have a limited amount of time, and this is something I can do when I have time. And I have some locations that I have found around the Asheville area and around me here, where I've had people that have cafes or little stores that have agreed to put these DVDs out. I have one of them free DVDs with a lot of nice Zeitgeist graphics on the little cardboard boxes. And I make them very attractive. So it's the kind of thing that people who might be hesitant to approach somebody that's holding a sign on the street would go up and say, hey, a free DVD, and this looks interesting. It's got, these interesting graphics on it. I might take this home and watch it. They'll take that home and check it out. And the main investment is my time and some money on my part in order to produce these things. But I've found there's been some success with it, because some of the cafes that I put them on the back of each one of these display cases, I put my contact information. And if they run out of DVDs, all they have to do is give me a call, and I'll bring some more down and fill up their cases again. And there's a minimum amount of input time on my part. Can do this when I have time, when I have spare moments in the evenings when I'm too tired to do anything else. And it seems to be spreading the information, which is what is one of the most important things we need to do beyond self-educating.
That's awesome, Gary. I think even the armchair activists could start with something like that. So I'm going to move on to Austin.
Yeah, so this really depends on the individual, of course, but there's so many things that people can do to help. And this was mentioned earlier, but it's extremely important, and I tend to enjoy starting at the very basics of just having a conversation. Opening your mouth when others are afraid to speak because they might be ostracized for their ideas. And certainly don't sugarcoat it because of that. So getting that dialogue rolling, some people can't start with their family, but starting with family, friends, some people can't talk about things at work, but I do all the time, and I love it. So that conversation and getting the dialogue rolling in the community is such a powerful thing that shouldn't be overlooked at all.
Thanks. Stephen?
I just want to say that the main thing that's worked for me here in Mississippi is becoming as familiar with the local community as I can. All the organizations that are around, all the people that seem to be influential in the town, and I guess getting their opinions and also trying to express our ideas to them and see how they feel about it, and if they feel like they can support it, I give them, and even if they don't feel like they can support it, I give them DVDs. I print off pamphlets. I try not to draw any lines in the sand. I try not to keep any of the organizations separate from us. I consider them all, like we spoke earlier, a part of the movement themselves. If they're dealing with some type of issue that involves us, and that's pretty much it. Also, if you're trying to, host a large scale event, try to, reach out to the people in your local community to get things going. Try to reach out to your other state members and see if they have anything to offer, because it seems like everybody has some type of skill set that they can volunteer to get something like a good Zeitgeist media event going.
Carl.
Okay, so what actions do you recommend for one person wanting to spread awareness in their community? So if it's one person, there's been some really great suggestions. Gary really gave a good one. And what I would suggest is maybe commute lines. This would be just a large wooden board, solid color. You could paint it and spray paint, some simple message like YouTube Zeitgeist Addendum, something like this. And the concept is that it would be in stop-and-go traffic, so tunnel crossings, bridge crossings, or maybe at a train station where people are walking, or maybe the entrance or exit ramps of highways, somewhere where people are going a little slower. And I think it's a good way to spread the word, especially if you're just one person and you don't want to be an armchair activist and you want to get out there and do something.
That's a good suggestion. I like it. Tenaro, what do you got for us?
Well, I do have one piece of advice that I can offer, and this is something that I've been using down here in Louisiana. Louisiana is, unfortunately, a very right-wing, not very progressive state. This state always votes Republican. They always vote anti-science. So being in a science advocacy movement, it's always been slow in Louisiana. And Stephen was mentioning that it's the same in Mississippi, and I've heard all about Mississippi from my sister who lived there last year. She said it was like Children of the Corn in Mississippi. But the advice that I have is, if it's just you, or if it's just you and a handful of people, if your chapter isn't very big, one of the good places to start is other organizations that are already rooted. They already have membership. Like I said a moment ago, we are a science advocacy movement. We are promoting science. There's no shortage of science-friendly organizations in all of the major cities. You can find science-friendly organizations in all of the universities. You go to them and you talk about the application of scientific method for social concern and some of the sustainable technologies that we're interested in promoting for the people to use, like solar energy, the Solar Roadways Project, and desalinization plants, and all the technologies that we just get into reading about here in the Zeitgeist Movement. And you do come out with some interest. And I guess that's the best thing that I can offer as far as actions recommended for one person is You don't necessarily have to hook up with a local chapter if you don't have one. You can hook up with other organizations that just happen to be around and might overlap to some degree with what it is we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. Adam.
So I agree with Bakari. I think that educating yourself is important. I think reaching out to your local chapter is great. And if you don't have one, you could look to start one, or like Tanara was just mentioning, there's stuff you can do to sort of start getting active. I think some practical advice I'd mention to people would be to print up business cards, link the movie, link the movement webpage in the business card, make it look nice. It's very cheap. You can actually get them printed for free from places like Vistaprint, and you just pay shipping. But it's always good to have sort of a takeaway for people so that they have information right there available at their fingertips if they want to, check out the movie after a discussion or a conversation that you've had with them. So you can also leave them places like on community boards, put them outside businesses in the window. A lot of places will have locations set aside business cards. So I think that's probably one practical piece I could have for people looking to try to start spreading awareness.
I like it. I've also heard the idea of people taping Zeitgeist Addendum, or you could do this with Moving Forward too, on the side of like one of those Redbox machines, free, and you don't even have to spend $1 for the Redbox rental. You could just take it. So that's one. Jason is next.
What I would recommend for one person wanting to spread awareness in their community. Well, first of all, I'm going to take on the assumption that anybody wanting to spread awareness in their community is ready to spread awareness in their community, as far as they have the time, they have the desire, they have the means, and a basic understanding of what we're talking about so they can actually engage the public. So my first recommendation to that person, and if you're out there listening, I'm speaking to you then, wait on no one to engage in awareness activism. You get to be the initiator of your own projects, of your own actions. And that is daunting for some people, but once you walk down that path, you realize it's exciting, it's fulfilling. So don't wait on people to tell you what to do. If you have an idea on how to communicate to people, go out there and do it, because what's going to happen is you're going to inspire other people around you by taking the initiative and following through. The second thing I'd recommend to someone would be continue with the learning process, which has already been stated here, but self-directed learning, it's voluntary learning. This is a voluntary movement. The volunteer aspect is common to both what you do to inform yourself and also what you do in initiating your own actions. And also that works into collaborating with other people. There are so many resources available that I don't even need to get into it. Anyone who goes to any of the chapter sites of the people that are here, or to the global site, or to YouTube, it's easy to find. The third thing, and at the risk of being cliche, I'm going to be, if you're out there and you're ready to spread awareness in a community, get into a chapter. Get into a chapter. If there isn't one, start one. I can't recommend that enough, because what's going to happen is then now you're in communication with a larger network. It's no longer you against the world. It's no longer you against your family. Now you're collaborating with a larger group. And with that comes a lot of benefits in reaching a larger audience. There's actually an efficiency to it. There are some people who do excellent work on their own. And again, I'll say get into a chapter. You don't have to. It is optional. But if they're asking for what I think, that's what I think. Let's see, the fourth thing I would recommend to someone is stay within your means. This happens a lot. Because of the amount of activism that goes on out here between different sized groups of people. I have a chapter of 2 and I've got a chapter of 400 that I help coordinate. And so I got to see the spectrum, if you will. Stay within your means with your activism. People have grand ideas. They set the bar too high. They might compare themselves to a larger chapter, and then all of a sudden you're frustrated. You can't do that. Or you just feel like, well, I'm not ready for that. And you use that as a rationale to not do anything. It doesn't matter how small your actions are. It's the fact that you're doing something is what matters, and it doesn't matter how big it is. What matters more is it relevant? Is it relevant to the train of thought? Are you actually getting the information that we're talking about out there and not working on a patchwork project or something like that? And the final thing I would say, if someone's looking for a piece of advice that is a specific action and they're solo, well, do a Why I Advocate video. It's an easy way to do something on your own and get that posted up there, because you're doing something that you can probably do really simply with a laptop, and then you're going to post it There's directions on how to do it on the global site. And it's putting content out there along with a larger group. And it's the saturation of all the content from all the different people that make a difference. So that would be my rundown. If someone was to ask me, what would I recommend at that point to someone who wants to spread awareness?
Awesome. Many great ideas. And to round it out, Raul?
A lot of the things I had on my mind have been said, but I'm going to say them anyways again. I just love hearing this stuff over and over and over. Number one, awareness is key. Learn everything you can. My favorite way, watch all the Peter Joseph lectures and Google the words blog space talk space Peter space Joseph and listen to all of the old Blog Talk Radio. If you want to know the best way to answer questions and to rebut arguments, that is going to have all of them. That's your best resource right there. Number two is, I'm a huge fan of what Carl said. If you can afford it, if you have any bit of disposable income and you want to put it towards this, look online for a site that will do lawn signs. I love lawn signs. And if you're in an area, it's got a lot of cars. If you're in a more rural area, believe me, it's just as effective. There's even less to look at out there. But put them up where you can. Number three, if you're in a college town, just something simple. And on the lawn sign and on this printout, just something really simple in big, bold letters. One that I had been using is, did money just become obsolete? For more info, search YouTube, and then in big block letters, like the first words, did money just become obsolete? Big letters, the middle letters, for more info, search YouTube, smaller. And then, again, big letters, the name of your favorite lecture. I use social pathology. I really love that one. And also just, again, have the dialogue. Go out, whether you're going to bars, work, talking to people on the street, you're in an elevator, and anyone mentions any of this, talk about it. And I like having a little business card. Not a business card, but you print out. I mean, what I personally use is I have all these permaculture type of links on one side and resource-based economy links on the other. A lot of times you'll see people who are kind of into the permaculture thing use that and tell them, hey, if you apply permaculture to a global basis, you got a resource-based economy. And it's right there. And you can just hand them out. And if you're at a bar and you don't have a lot of time to write down a link, write down the name, boom, you have that right there in your pocket. You can give it to him. You've already made him think about it, made him wonder about it. So just to reiterate, Blog Talk, Peter Joseph, search that on Google. Go through all of those. 2, lawn signs or just paper signs if you're in a college town. And 3, just talk to everyone you can, even if it's just for a minute or two. Just implant these little ideas and have a little card with links on you. You can get them done up cheap. Put your favorite links on there. Just do what you really like. Do what you relate to, what you can explain. Those are my big ones.
Jason, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just on the radio show recommendation, which is excellent, and I'm actually doing this myself, just to help along for the listening audience. If you have a device or a computer and you have access to iTunes, this is not an Apple endorsement, by the way. It's just the easiest way I found to access these shows. If you have access to iTunes, just go to the iTunes store and type in the words in the search bar, ZM Global Radio or TZM Global Radio. The very first search return is going to be the TZM podcast from Blog Talk, all archived since 2009 all the way to present day. Probably by the time you hear this recording, it'll already be there as well. And that is a great way to grab all of the shows at once and download them into whatever device you can or just onto your computer. And I use a PC. I can actually subscribe to this link in Windows with Winamp. I don't even have to use iTunes. But if you go to the iTunes store, it's very easy to find and grab all the MP3s all at once. And you'll have the whole library available to you.
I also wanted to add, and those are all great recommendations, and I know those especially Peter's going through those Q&As really will help you, because that's where he got all the really tough questions early on, when we had just a lot of people just hanging out just because they wanted to try to poke a hole in what we're talking about. So he has a lot of great responses. And two, you'll learn and pick up and make them your own as you learn and do that self-directed learning. It'll come easier and easier the more that you really get into it. Also, the new Culture in Decline series, cultureindecline.com, I believe. And on YouTube, you can search Culture in Decline. That's Peter's new series. I think he's taken a lighthearted touch so that we can reach more people in an entertaining way and introduce them to the material. And, there's not Zeitgeist Movement on that. And again, here's another thing, too, is we're the Zeitgeist Movement. That's what we call ourselves, but you can do activism and not mention our name at all. You could do activism and just talk to the values, just talk to people about the values. When you say resource-based economy, nobody knows what that is until they learn more. So you probably don't want to lead with that. You want to kind of ease into it and ask questions and find out what's important to them and how you can relate to that. And I want to get on to our last question. I'm really loving a lot of the responses we've had tonight. A lot of good material that we will be sharing with our fellow activists and aspiring activists. But I think it's good to end on this one. Do you have any favorite stories you've heard on how someone came to the movement or discovered the Zeitgeist Movement or the Venus Project or just this train of thought? And Adam has one to start with. Go ahead.
So, one of the most interesting ones I think that I heard was we ran into someone at one of our events at a local festival, and they said that they were shocked to see us because they had just gotten off the phone with some family they were speaking to in Greece, and the family member had actually told them about the Zeitgeist Movement, and then the next day they show up at this local festival, and there we are with a table. So I thought that was always kind of my favorite anecdote about the movement and how someone came into it, because it just shows the global nature of what we're doing.
Wow, that's cool. And next, Tenaro.
Well, if we're going to discuss our favorite anecdotes, I would probably have to take mine back to Occupy Shreveport. Occupy Shreveport, I was the only Zeitgeist member who attended, and it was a bit embarrassing in that compared to Occupy Wall Street, which lasted, a month, 2 months, it was quite a long period of time. Occupy Shreveport lasted a relatively unimpressive 2 or 3 hours. I was among the first people to show up. I was most certainly the last person to leave, because Occupy Shreveport consisted of pretty much of everybody getting together, holding up signs, walking around the business district in Shreveport. We sat on the lawn and played some music over at the courthouse, and then after a while everybody split. But I didn't split. After everybody else did, I went out to the street and I continued to hold up my sign, and I continued to engage in conversations with people. But I had several interesting experiences all throughout Occupy Shreveport and thereafter. A number of clearly members of Anonymous showed up at Occupy Shreveport wearing their Guy Fawkes masks, and they had an exchange with me, and they, like many other people, were uninformed regarding what it is we're doing and what the resource-based economy is about. I had somebody from the Fair Tax Movement who showed up with his truck decked out in signs and bumper stickers, and he and I had an exchange. And there was a woman, after everybody left and I was standing on the street and engaging people myself, there was a woman who showed up, who had came over from Texas for some reason. I can't recall what she was in Louisiana for, but she and I had a conversation that must have lasted at least an hour. And she was so amazed by the things that I was telling her that she took one of my last DVDs and wrote down some websites that I had suggested, the zeitgeistmovement.com and LA Zeitgeist. She wrote all of these links down. She wrote the names of the Zeitgeist movies down. And she said that she was going to go home and she was going to watch them with her son. And her son was in college. And I didn't hear back from her, but I hope that she went back to where she came from and looked up a chapter. But that was my experience at Occupy Shreveport.
Great, thanks for that. So I have a few. I have 3 that come to mind initially that I like to share with people just so they know it's possible. One person that I talked to, and this was way early, back when the global movement had the old forum, there was a guy who admitted that he came to the movement because an activist had given him a Zeitgeist Addendum DVD, and he pitched it in his car. And then about 6 months later, he had to clean his car because he had pitched too much stuff in his car. And because it was a DVD, he didn't want to just throw it away. And so on a whim, he decided, well, I guess I'll watch this. And he said, I'll tell you that I was the most conservative, Republican, free market champion of the world there was. And this totally shook my world. And I've been different ever since. And it's just opened up a whole new paradigm to me of what the world could be like and how we could be living in a better way. So that was a really fun story. Another one was more recently, I saw a gentleman had written about how he came to the movement because he was concerned about some stuff his son, his teenage son, was posting online about the evils of the money system, and he was printing some sort of a flyer in his home, and I think he was worried that he was involved in some sort of cult or some sort of gang, or wasn't really sure what this was about. And so, being a concerned father, he investigated it, and as a result, he said it changed his life. He found the Venus Project specifically and was like, I've been looking for this my whole life, and I found it through my son, which was, I love that story because it really is like, yeah, you might think it's sketchy if you see people, a lot of people don't quite get all the concepts, and they're still hanging on to that money is evil or capitalism is evil and things like that. But connected to, inspired by, things they've heard about our movement, when you really get into the nitty gritty of it, it's not about being anti anything. It's about being pro this beautiful synchronistic system, this dynamic equilibrium where you have this great balance between the individual and the collective, where human needs are put first and profit is not in the picture, where we're really just using science and technology to feed everyone, shelter everyone, and not, in a rationing way. And I just love that he was so inspired by that moment. And the third story that I wanted to share with you was just one that was really hysterical. I was in TeamSpeak one night when we were doing chats in TeamSpeak, and somebody dropped in, and we were talking about how we came to the movement. And we said, so I don't remember his name, but we said, how did you come to the movement? And he said, well, to be honest, it wasn't the most straightforward way. He said, I downloaded what I thought was a torrent of Batman Begins, and it ended up being Zeitgeist Addendum. And at first, I was really pissed off, but then I was sort of drawn in by it. And so he said, if I hadn't have actually watched the film that pissed me off, he's like, I'm actually really glad today that it wasn't Batman Begins. And I love that story because that's how he found the movement, what we're doing, what we're advocating. And all these stories are going to come out, and I hope that we hear more and more of them as time goes on. Yeah, I don't know that I would advocate being dishonest with uploads or things that you're sharing online with people. But anyway, it happens. And he's, an informed person as a result of that. I want to thank you for participating in the panel. I think I have a lot of great material here. I hope that this discussion, coordinators sharing with everyone what they've been involved in, gives you a better picture that there is stuff going on all over the United States, all over the world, and we should be really proud of what we're doing and what we're accomplishing, even though it's not so big that we're on the nightly news. That's something to shoot for, perhaps. This concludes part 2 of the U.S. Coordinator panel. Thanks so much for joining us. Some common themes that I want to leave you with. Self-directed education. Can't possibly emphasize that enough. Continue to learn as much as you can through scientific resources, through people that are working in the respective fields that we cover in talking about our proposed solution. And Jacques Fresco has a book list. Many of the coordinators involved in the official network have some great resources for you, so please connect with them if you don't know where to start. tzmchapters.net is a good place to start just to find out about our chapter structure. There's a chapter guide there, but beyond that, our orientation guide available at the zeitgeistmovement.com website is going to really help you with an overview of these ideas. Also, any material by Jacques Fresco on the Venus Project is going to give you more insights into a resource-based economy. Also, another thing that was emphasized, community involvement. Couldn't emphasize that enough, it seems. A lot of talk about engaging people in conversations continually, wherever you are, whether it's your workplace, your neighborhood, meeting people at festivals, or artistic events. Connecting with other groups as well, other nonprofits, and opening up a dialogue about the greater picture, the larger picture, the solution that we're advocating that also extends to the various other causes that fall within that currently, the patchwork efforts. For some things you can do now, nonviolent, non-participation actions. We went over these in part 1. Number 1, expose the federal government cartel. That goes a long way in helping to shed light on the existing problems with our current system. Some people are not interested in hearing about a new system because they think that problems can be solved within our current system or by our government, or your government, wherever you are. So it's good to actually shed light on where there is corruption and how that is inherent to the system, as opposed to specific people per se. We attribute that to the design of the system being outdated. Number 2, boycott the federal banks. Ways that you can do this now: you can move your money to credit unions, you can start doing trade, you can engage in activities in time banks or use alternative currencies, things like that. Just trying to withdraw from the system in any way that you can. Boycott the mainstream news networks. What's number 3? Look for those independent news sources that may be asking the right questions, really wanting to get to the bottom of what's going on. And if you are hearing something repeatedly through the mainstream news and it's really being hammered out, you may want to challenge that. Seek out an alternative view. Seek out if anyone has an opposing view to the news that you're getting and critically analyze that to the best of your ability. Support people who help to expose corruption and support people who are working to find a solution. 4, support the internet. Can't put enough emphasis on that. The freedom to access information online is what has given us the growth that we've seen in this movement and people coming to awareness about this as an alternative option, as something, who would have thought about the possibilities, what it would look like getting out of the monetary system, using science and technology for social concern. Yes, people like Jacques Fresco, Buckminster Fuller, even B.F. Skinner have contemplated these kinds of things, but more and more people are able to access this information because they have it available to them through the internet. So do support efforts to protect our freedoms within the internet. That's to access that information. 5, boycott the military. If you're already in the military, it's hard to do that, but at least you can be a representative from within the system. I know there already are existing representatives within that system that are learning as much as they can, that represent their part in the larger play of the game and are not so happy about it, but do understand that they're also in a position to help create change in the biggest way. If you're not in the military, then by all means, please don't join. 6, boycott the energy companies. And you can try to do this in any way that you can, getting off grid, conserving energy. Of course, that it's hard to cut off completely, but it's encouraged that if you can, why not do it? 7, reject the political system, which is also challenging to do because, especially at this time before the elections, it's all that we're hearing. But we need for people to bringing attention to the fact that it's not a given. We can make a different choice. We don't have to consent with a vote. We can choose a different direction and start to build something independently of that. 8, become active in creating awareness where you are, whether or not that means joining a chapter or starting a chapter or just advocating a resource-based economic model where you are, and the values that are conducive to that is important. And that leads me into this next part too. If you're frustrated that the Zeitgeist Movement is not putting a focus on building intentional communities as our activism, this part's for you. I get contacted by a lot of people that are very frustrated that we're not raising money for them personally to live in a sustainable community. What I want you to know is intentional communities have been around for hundreds of years, and they haven't brought about a resource-based economy yet. But there are plenty of them that you can connect with in existence right now, and perhaps even near you. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel. By all means, if you have an inclination to do that, please connect with them. In addition, be advocating what the bigger picture of the Zeitgeist Movement is. As a resource for that, I recommend checking out directory.ic.org, and that's for those people who are seeking that out. That's a good place to connect with intentional communities. Directory.ic for intentionalcommunities.org. Yes, and understand that to be classified as a resource-based economic model, the model would need to fit the following characteristics. And this is taken directly from the frequently asked questions section of the Zeitgeist Movement. It's not made up by me, Jen Wilding. It's something that if you're supporting the movement, you should recognize this is what you're supporting. This model proposed as a solution that includes these 6 things all in tandem, simultaneously. Number 1, no money or market system. So no exchange system, no money or market system. That's number 1. Characteristic number 2, an automation of labor. It would be a high-tech community, not a low-tech community that we're advocating. 3, technological unification of the earth through a systems theory approach. And that shows that we have an understanding that we're all on one planet. That is, when we talk about sustainability, it's not one corner of the world. To really be sustainable, you need to account for the planet as a unified whole to the best of your ability to start building a system that addresses resources on that scale. 4, access versus property ownership. 5, self-contained or localized city production systems, because that's efficient for energy use. And 6, using the scientific method as the methodology of governance. Some people don't understand that that's something different than democracy. It is a different model than a democratic model. So just putting those out there as clarification again. These can be found on the zeitgeistmovement.com website. These 6 characteristics under the frequently asked questions, characteristics that define a resource-based economic model. These are the 6. So if it doesn't fit all of these 6, it's a patchwork effort that is solving problems for the now, but not solving root causes just yet. Patchwork efforts are needed. Please do those while advocating a resource-based economic model. Usually, because of what we advocate, people have that value shift occur, and they, as a byproduct, are inspired to connect with patchwork efforts, specific causes that relate to their interests. So find the interests you have an inclination to explore, to really make a contribution to, and connect with those so that you can have that connection to helping people now. That is something that we encourage, or supporting other efforts, connecting with other organizations and doing some cross-promotion. But the ultimate message of the Zeitgeist Movement is advocating that resource-based economic model. Those 6 characteristics are what we're shooting for, that bigger picture. And really, it's okay to do both. It's encouraged to do that and the patchwork efforts. It's just that we have our focus so that somebody's focused on that bigger picture moving forward. True sustainability is going to be planet-wide. It's going to be something also that doesn't come through exploitation or coercion. It's going to be something that people volunteer for because they think it's a good idea. And the only way someone can think it's a good idea is if they were exposed to it and they're informed about it. And also they understand why their current system isn't something that is going to work. That's what our whole education piece is about. So yes, we do have some actions you can take now as far as withdrawing from the existing system. And the part that we're in right now, the stage that we're in right now, as we're transitioning, we're in the transition, by the way, right now, is that we are creating awareness. Because right now, if you were to take a poll of the planet's population and say, raise your hand if you want a resource-based economic model, how many people would vote, I do, or I want that? Only the people in this movement, really. So that's what stage we're in. We're not ready for okay, everybody can build this amazing community and we're going to turn it over next week, and what's the holdup? That understanding is the context that is needed for the greater structure to start to come together. And it's going to come together probably in pieces. And what we're all doing with the patchwork efforts are going to come together nicely. They are nice byproducts of what we are shooting for, making small improvements where we can now, but reminding people that what we're really shooting for is the more holistic system, is the declaring all of the world's resources as belonging to all of the world's people, having an intelligent management of the world's resources. And that's a shared goal that we want people to vote for. And that's where the vote comes in, is that people would vote for this by showing their support. And that's what we really want. A lot of people come to me and say, I don't know how to open a conversation about these ideas. So what suggestions do you have? And I was thinking about this recently when I was at a festival event, and I was doing this on a regular basis as people were approaching. First of all, I waited until people approached us for the most part, or if they just kind of looked vaguely interested, their eye is directed towards the material we have. They're seeing pictures of the earth and images that show that, there's a problem with the current profit-driven system compared to a sustainable system that puts humans first. We have a lot of great artwork on the Zeitgeist Media Project.com website that you can check out, and we use those at festivals a lot. But a lot of that art drew people in, or they recognized the word zeitgeist. Some people may have seen it or heard about a movie, whether or not they had or not. When they asked about the movement, a lot of the ways that I approach it is, well, we are a global sustainability movement. We can technically feed and clothe and shelter all of the world's people and care for them in a healthcare sense right now. It's technically possible if we wanted to. And the only obstacle in the way is people deciding that we can do that. And usually when I'm talking to them, I haven't had anybody say they don't believe that we can. They really do. At least where I've been with the festivals that we've participated in, people understand that we are pretty advanced technologically, so that does seem feasible. But it is feasible as far as what we're proposing, and the way that can be proposed is that we are advocating getting out of the monetary system. And then I go into that. We want to get out of the monetary system into an access system, not even a barter system, but just a system where people have access to what they need when they need it and have a high quality of living. And you can kind of see the wheels turning usually when you talk like this. And some people say, well, you can't get out. How do you do that? How do you get out of the monetary system? Or what about the political system? And I say, well, we don't believe politics solves problems. Do you? We actually think that it can be done if we decide to do it, and we can get out of the monetary system if we decide to do it. But the issue is the human factor of deciding whether or not to do it. And we have quite a few people worldwide who are on board to make this happen. And a lot of people are just enticed enough by that. It interests them. They pick up materials, they get information about lectures, about videos. We promote a lot of times Peter Joseph's work, but I want to emphasize that one of the reasons why we promote his work is because he's put a lot of stuff out there that specifically orient people to these solutions, and they're bridging the gap between the problem and the solutions. So they work really well as tools for that. But it could be anything created by anybody who's an advocate of these ideas. The artistic ways that we represent these ideas can be very powerful because they reach people at that emotional level. And our emotions are where we are connected to our values. And no matter what a person's worldview looks like, whether they're religious or whether they're involved in politics or whether they're very nationalistic, they probably have some values that are shared by our movement at the very, very core. And that's what you connect to. You know, we only need to connect to people who are interested. If someone's genuinely not interested, then there's no need to persuade them. I do think that it may take a few generations for this to pick up. I know that it's easier for the younger generations to get, actually. And even the older generations that I talk to recognize this, because when they're in agreement with it, they say, you know, not my generation, but maybe yours, kind of thing. They recognize that we have quite a challenge ahead of us. But it's exciting to see people connect with this one-on-one, and I encourage you to do so and to not be afraid to do so and to not feel like you have to be Peter Joseph or Jacques Fresco to articulate these ideas. The thing that's going to get you past any fear that you have with that is going to be that self-directed education, because when your knowledge is rooted in science and the understandings that we're talking about, then you can feel really good about them because they're really hard to negate. As far as the theories of each individual area, when somebody says they don't think it's going to work, what we're proposing, it's usually because they're focused on one particular area. They may think that money is necessary or exchange is necessary, and usually that's related to a competitiveness. They feel like competition is inherent in human beings. And the way that I address that is by saying, you know what, you're absolutely right, that competition is inherent in human beings in an environment of scarcity. But do you think competition is inherent in an environment of abundance? And do you think we have the ability to change? Because really, it makes sense that competition is a natural response in an environment of scarcity when humans are competing for survival. But we know that we have the technological means to no longer compete for resources. If we get out of the monetary system, you don't have money as an obstacle to what we can develop. It's just whatever you can dream up that we have the materials for gets developed, and is anything that along those lines that is forwarding the survival of our species to survive and thrive. And then I ask, how do you feel about the scientific method as a way to determine what is true and real to the best of our ability? Of course, it's continually updated, but just as a methodology, how do you feel about it? And if they feel pretty good about it, then I say, well, that's generally it. Using that method to solve problems means I can feel pretty confident about this direction because it's continually updated as more knowledge is acquired through experimentation. And imagine what kind of experimentation might go on outside of the monetary system when it's not for a profit. So I hope that you're all sharing this information with other people, and thank you, activists that are out there. I appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing and stay connected with the global network, and we can all support each other in the process.